Welcome, everyone. Please welcome Catie McDonald, Senior Advisor at FarWell. Catie is a trusted strategic partner and leader who is passionate about the credit union movement. Known for her ability to ask thought-provoking questions and listen intently, Catie leverages her communication skills to drive successful outcomes in her work. Throughout her career, Catie has collaborated closely with CEOs, executive leadership teams, various boards, bringing clarity to strategic vision and aligning the stakeholders to produce remarkable results. Catie, thank you for sharing your insights with us today, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Dean, and thank you to the association for having me for this event. I'm getting to talk about one of my favorite topics, so y'all are going to indulge me today while I tell you lots of great stories and lots of good tips about succession planning. My marketing team would be very mad at me if I didn't spend a little bit of time up front and then we get it out of the way about talking about where I work and how we can help credit unions. So as Dean said, I'm Catie McDonald. I work with an advisory firm in Madison, Wisconsin, so a little bit further away from where most of y'all are. And by advisory firm, that just means that we offer a lot of different services that primarily help with change. So if you think about succession planning, that's a huge change. I normally spend a lot of time with strategy. Strategies always change. Many of you at the credit union have probably been through, gosh, at least one core conversion, if not more. And y'all know how much change that is. So we provide all sorts of services to help with that, whether it be strategic planning, project management, more IT project management, and actual change management as well. There's a process behind that that sometimes can seem so common sense, but we know sense isn't always common. So it puts a process around it so we can all work towards it together. So that's what we do here at FarWell. As Dean mentioned, I'm really passionate about credit unions. Before coming to FarWell, I worked at TrueStage back when it was CUNA Mutual. I worked at America's Credit Unions back when it was CUNA. And that's the nice thing about being in Madison, Wisconsin. If some of y'all are familiar, we're kind of a hub of credit union activity. So you get the opportunity to work in a lot of different parts of the industry. So when I came to FarWell, I was excited to see that we've been working with a lot of credit unions, foundations, associations, leagues over the last few years. A lot of it doing these types of speaking engagements, but also, as you'll hear through some of our stories that we'll talk about today, also just doing the work, putting the succession plan together, creating the strategy, managing the project. We offer all this to credit unions and to other companies, not just in Madison, but throughout the nation. So you got my spiel. We can move on from that now. But if you have any questions about it, please put them in the chat. My contact information will be at the end of today's presentation. I love to talk about this type of stuff. As Dean and Amy know, I've been able to talk to them prior to today's meeting. I can talk about this stuff all day. We will not be all day today. It will just be 45 minutes and then we'll have questions. But if you have any follow-up questions, I would love to help or to point you in a direction of somebody else that could help. So please feel free to do that after our meeting today. So today, we are here to talk about succession planning. And we can't get away from succession planning. We hear about it all the time. And if I was doing this in person, which would be so much fun, one of the first questions I would ask you is, why are you interested in succession planning? A lot of people come to these meetings at different places. Either they don't have a succession plan, they want a succession plan, their succession plan didn't work. They're looking for a CEO succession plan, a board succession plan. So I wanted to just kind of ask today, and if you can put it in the chat, that'd be great, where I think you're able to unmute and just holler it out where what you're thinking. But I want to make sure too to address any questions or needs that y'all have in today's presentation. So by kind of knowing up front what you're thinking about, what you're looking for, we'll be able to adjust as we go. And I'll give you just a second to do that in the chat, which I can't really see because I'm presenting. So Dean, if you could let me know anything that pops up That would be awesome.
Well, one response is because I don't want to die at my desk. This isn't Wells Fargo.
Hey, amen to whoever said that. Amen. Yes.
And I'm just gonna shout it out, but
Go, Lori.
hi, how are you? You know, had a great succession plan for a CEO, but kind of fell apart. So I need to start at square one and get ready.
Okay. Both of those are great reasons to be here, and we'll make sure to address both of those. But if you have any questions as we go, please feel free to put them in the chat or to just holler them out. If you can't figure it out yet, we're casual here, so please feel free to do that. One reason I asked this question up front is because one thing I'm learning by doing this work more and more is that some people are really focused on the CEO succession planning, leadership team succession planning, and some people are very focused on board succession planning. And I want to talk about that a little bit up front. This presentation will primarily focus on CEO and kind of credit union staff succession planning. If we have somebody on the call who's interested in board succession planning, I can touch on that as we go too. As some of y'all may be aware, especially as smaller credit unions, the NCUA has gotten much more interested in succession planning lately. And depending on where you are in your state, may have some different requirements. What I have found is that those requirements primarily focus on board succession planning, which I understand, but I also find a little interesting, and can be very check the box. So there's a form to fill out. You have the form, it's filled out. Your regulator and your examiner will be happy. But there's so much more to it than that. And we'll talk about that as we go on today. So we're interested in succession planning. We know why we're here. Let's talk about it kind of just in general, because the problem is everywhere. You know, one reason I showed that slide with some of the groups that we work with is to show we work with large credit unions, small credit unions, medium-sized credit unions, East Coast, West Coast, South, North. This question gets brought up no matter where you are, no matter your size, no matter how long you've been around. It also continues to get brought up outside of the credit union space too. So it's one of those things that we continue to hear about, but why haven't we really found a solution to it, right? Why is this still such an evergreen problem? And so when I was originally doing this presentation, I started doing some research because I'm like, honestly, why do we keep having these issues? And the issues really are from the biggest companies of Disney. I mean, you'd think they could hire it out to somebody who could figure it out for them. If y'all are familiar with this story, their CEO was there, left. They ended up bringing him back because they didn't like the succession plan. Then they couldn't get rid of him. So all elements of things we see in succession planning, similar at Microsoft. This is a really interesting case study. And for all of these, I have links to them in the presentation, which I'm totally fine sharing. I can send it to Dean and Amy and they can send it out. But then you can read more about these case studies as well. There's always so much to learn and to take away from them. But they had somebody in-house that they completely overlooked because they thought, oh, we need somebody bigger, better, whatever. Can't be this person who's been here all along. Well, come to find out it was, right? And so how do we think about external versus internal? What are the benefits? What are the things that we need to maybe keep an eye out for? And then here, I mean, nobody wants to be in the headlines like this, lack of succession plan, right? And that's some of the biggest companies in the world, and continue to see these issues of, you also kind of get a name for yourself too, right? If you're looking for a successor, it doesn't work out, people start wondering, well, what's going on? Similar situation at Nike, interesting case study there, which you can kind of see in Microsoft too, where you had a founder who was part of the executive team, part of the leadership team, kind of that guru of sorts that people followed, and then all of a sudden you got to replace that. Well, that's really tough too, that charismatic leader. And how do you do that? Well, neither of these companies did it well, to be honest, because they both ended up bringing their CEO back in different forms and different titles. And then we all know that's not the easiest job to step into when the person who had been there before and been so successful is kind of this shadow in the background. So I throw these up here just to say, hey, it's not just us, it's everybody. And not only is it everybody, but y'all, there was a TV show about it. That's how big of a problem it is. If I could see your faces, I would do a poll to say, how many people watched Succession? I know it's on HBO and we don't all get that channel. It's also one of those where it's, you know, I kind of want to escape work when I watch TV, and this isn't always an escape. But there are some lessons in this show. If you're not familiar, it's a family-owned business. The father, the man there in the middle, is getting ready to step down, and all sorts of bad behavior comes into play. People vying for the position, not making good decisions based on the company, but based on themselves. In this case, and I'm not giving away any plot lines, so don't worry. No spoilers here, but there was a succession plan in place. So Lori, this is a little bit what you mentioned. There was a plan in place, everybody agreed to it, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. And then what do you do? And why did that happen? So it's everywhere. We can't escape it. We cannot even escape it when we're sitting on the couch at night, just trying to relax and get rid of work. But we have one more data point. And these data points to me are so telling because the numbers are just crazy. Especially part of my background is I sat on a credit union board for a couple of years, went through a succession process. Some of my stories that you'll hear today are from that experience. But if you think about this, Fortune 500 companies, again, those are those big guys that we were looking at earlier. Only 54% are proactively developing a plan. Not enough. 39% no internal candidate. That's interesting because if we're starting to talk about, do we go external? Do we go internal? One thing we'll talk about as well is, can we plan for the CEO departure, or is it immediate need? We need to fill something immediately. Anything immediately, you need somebody internal there to step in and to be able to kind of take the reins, even if it's not in a permanent role. But if you don't have any candidates identified, what's going to happen when you're in a stressful situation anyway, right? An additional data point that's not on the slide, but that I always find fascinating is from our friends at Deloitte. 86% of boards and executives think succession plan is very important. Only 14% of them think that they do it well. Y'all, there's so much disconnect here. And there's so much, I'm not going to say succession planning is easy, but it's doable. It is very doable. And so as we think about the why, and then we start thinking about how we're going to solve for it, that'd be a little bit more of the rest of the presentation. What are the things that we can do? Sometimes these types of projects, and at the end of the day, succession planning is a project, can seem overwhelming, right? But if we break it down into small parts, we can think of things that we can do that can lead us into the right direction. So let's do that today. And let's also talk about some of the key issues, because these are things, especially in credit unions, that we tend to see in all of the instances that we've been able to research and interview and talk to people about their succession plan. These issues seem common, but they also seem addressable. So some of the key issues that we see are that in theory, it's a small pool of candidates. So if you think of all the employees And then all the people who want to be managers, all the people who want to manage people, all the people who want to be senior leaders. There's not a huge pool of people who actually want to be a CEO. I have a theory that that pool is also shrinking because of the size of the risk of that position. We put more and more on our CEOs for success or failure, or we have a low tolerance for change. You know, sometimes things don't go well. That doesn't mean that they're a bad CEO. It just means that we're in a bumpy period. But we see the risk of that. If somebody has to take the blame, it's going to be the CEO. I could pull up a ton of examples of that. I won't bore you with it today, but we can think of them. And not everybody wants to be in that position. Not everybody wants that level of stress. So already you're working with a smaller group of candidates, which can be harder to identify, harder to find. One thing I hear from a lot of people I talk to is that people used to move for jobs. I know when I was growing up, I felt like a lot of families would move in and out of town because a family member was getting a job or a promotion, and they would move the family. And you don't see that as much either. I mean, that's more of a personal risk, but that gets taken into account as well, especially if you're recruiting for an external candidate. Frequently, we see boards or leadership teams being taken off guard. They didn't realize that Dean was ready to retire. They didn't know that Lori was looking for something else, right? And then all of a sudden, it's there. And and you'll hear me say this a lot today, what was important and had always been important is now suddenly urgent. And we didn't spend time on it when it was important, and now we're stressing out because it's urgent. A lot of credit unions I talk to, and I wish I had the answer to this one, are looking for the right tool. So they're looking for some sort of magic system. I'm going to do sound effects, and you go in and you're like, beep, boop, boop, and you put the names in, and you put the characteristics, and you put your competencies that you want, and then boop, the right person with the right salary range and the right location just pops up because of this magic tool. Y'all, that does not exist. I'm sorry to break it to you today, but it doesn't exist. And waiting around for it is not going to help either. There are some tools, we will talk about them later, that we can do that will help with this. But at the end of the day, it's people making people decisions. And sometimes those work out great. Sometimes they work out fine. But they lay at the heart of this work is that we have to be bold to make decisions as well. And then I can give y'all so many stories of assumptions without documentation. So I assume that, my manager knows that if I were to get sick and not be able to present today for this presentation, that Christine is my backup. Well, y'all, guess what? I had not told my manager or Christine that. I just assumed it, but I hadn't shared it. I hadn't documented it. I hadn't prepared Christine. We see this so often. Quick story here. Last fall, I was working with the Iowa League doing more of a workshop around succession planning, which was really fun. We spent around 3 hours together in a room. I realize when I say that out loud, that does not sound like fun for everybody, but it was for me. And we put together some succession planning templates and started writing some things down. We had one CEO that was in there adamant. He had a great plan. His plan was good. Leadership team knew about it. Board knew about it. I was meeting with the league couple at the beginning of the year just to talk about our plans for the year. And one of the women who was part of that presentation said, "Hey, remember that CEO?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." He was very confident. And she said, "Well, come to find out, he had to step down and nobody knew what the plan was. He was very confident with the plan that was in his head that he had shared with people and told them. But then when it came time to kind of, rehash what he said to them a year ago, nobody can do that, right? So it wasn't documented. Nobody knew where it was. He was unable to give his details. Chaos ensues, right? So here are just some issues that we see. And I always feel like anytime we want to solve a problem, we've got to identify those issues up front, because then it's like, okay, here's what we're dealing with. We can fix this. we can always make motion to move forward and make progress. So let's get to the fun part of this and figuring out how to take real steps, actionable steps that we can start doing today to help with our succession planning. Also, that slide scares me. Just every time I do this presentation, I'm like, ooh, that is risk. We want to talk about risk, but some people are into that. So succession is inevitable, and we've mentioned that a few times on the call. It's one of those things, even if you don't want it to happen, even if you think it's important, you don't spend time on it, if you pretend it's not happening, it will happen. It will come for you at some point. We have to accept it. And so if it's inevitable, what are some things that we can do to address that? So it's March Madness season, right? In other way to say it, it is the shot that you're always going to take, right? It is the free throw. You know it's going to happen. You know you're going to have to do it. You've got to practice for it. And one thing I like to share, especially with boards, is that there is an obligation to the company and to your employees to put a plan in place. We've seen where maybe the CEO doesn't want to admit that they're leaving, doesn't want to start preparing for that second phase of life, and therefore they don't put a plan in place. Maybe that's the reason they're avoiding it, they're not putting the plan in place. And I'm just going to be honest with y'all, that's selfish. That is selfish. It's not just selfish to the organization, it's selfish to the employees. Part of why we're here as leaders is to secure the company for the future. And the best way to do that is through succession planning and finding the right people so that those types of changes are smooth, easy as they can be, right? And so one thing that I've actually seen some CEOs do, and depending on your role at the credit union, this could be you, or this could be a good advice to somebody who is in this position, is if a CEO is looking to retire, so not moving on to a next position, not moving on to be a CEO somewhere else, but they truly are going into that next really exciting phase of life, right? That can be very hard for people who have defined themselves by their job. So I've talked to a couple CEOs who, if they see that on the horizon 2 years out, they start hiring a coach to help them through that, right? Because it's not just a process that we're writing down or making sure we have somebody in place, but it's an emotional stepping away from something that has been so much a part of you for so long. And if the CEO is not dealing with that in a life perspective, we can feel those effects at the credit union. The best and funniest, to be honest, example I've heard here is a credit union up north in Wisconsin had done all the right things for the succession planning. They had put the plan in place. They had found a successor. They celebrated the CEO, right? Like they had the party, the cake, all the good things. And then the CEO would not move out of the office, right? Couldn't imagine not coming into the office every day, and couldn't imagine taking the stuff from the office. And so then something that had been really beautiful and a great way to celebrate started to get really icky because you're having to like push this person out who had been really good at what they've been doing, but all of a sudden it's very hard to move forward when they're still there. So I do ask y'all to think about kind of the emotional part of it that the CEO may be going through. I think sometimes we forget about that. But that's definitely a part of it, and addressing it can help the process go a lot smoother. And that really gets into setting clear expectations as well. As a CEO, if you know you're going to retire, let that be known. Let the timeline be known. A lot of times that can be scary because all of a sudden you feel like, well, if I let people know I'm leaving, they're going to start, trying to get my job or trying to do this. And there are ways to handle that. And I think, especially if we think about succession planning as more than just succession, it's talent development, it's retention, it's all these things. If you set clear expectations for people internally, you're going to be able to retain that talent a lot better than if they were thinking, oh man, I want to be a CEO. My CEO is never going to retire, so I'm going to have to go somewhere else. Well, if it was shared, clear expectations, if y'all have read some Brene Brown, clear is kind. Clear is not always easy, but it's kind. Then maybe you could retain that person because the CEO is thinking about retiring. You can do some training, win-win for everybody, right? And then we've touched on this a bit, just to be really clear, especially with CEO, as I mentioned, we're not focusing on board as much in this presentation, but you do need two plans. And it's the, we know a date, we're working towards a date, we have time, and it's the win the lottery plan, not the hit by the bus ban, the lottery plan, right? And both of those are necessary and usually very different. So please make sure that that you have both. Any questions in the chat before I move on to the next slide? Amy?
I don't have any questions.
Nope, just an error, sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did
No, go
somebody-
ahead, Lori.
Oh, I don't have any really, but you hit on, you need two plans, you know, I have to tell you, that's really, I feel like I've sat in on a lot of these and that's the first time I've heard that, and I needed two plans and I only had one and that plan isn't working, so I like that advice.
Oh,
from
good.
Karen a lot, yeah.
Yeah, I hate to hear you went through that, Lori, but I'm glad to hear that that nugget was helpful. For us, when I was on a credit union board, we really struggled with creating two plans or asking our CEO for two plans. Partially because our CEO had been there for so long, she started kind of feeling like, well, why are you asking me this? Why do you need this, right? And it was just for the safekeeping of the credit union, because at the end of the day, it's about keeping the credit union safe and sound and stable. But it wasn't as easy or as straightforward as you would think, right? Because a lot of this is about human emotions and people, and we're all people. We all do weird stuff. We all have kind of our own little hangups. And when these types of things, these types of really big changes happen, which are both organizational change and human change, some interesting things come out, right? And to me, just to transition on this slide, one of the things that we forget to do, and this is on a lot of different projects, but specifically with succession planning, is to really know who is responsible. I used to work with a guy who always said, who is the throat to choke, which is a terrible way to think about it, but he has a point, and I think about it often, right? Like, so if something were to go just a little awry, who do I go to? Who is that person who's going to help me figure it out? And with succession planning, there are multiple layers to it and multiple groups involved.
Katie,
Particularly, the board is involved. And I feel like anytime you get the board involved, because they're not and they should not be in the day-to-day business of the credit union, they need to have very clear understanding of where you need them to support versus where you need them to make a decision. And those can be two very different things.
Katie,
And with,
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
Dean?
before we go on,
Yeah.
I think Ron had a question.
Oh, yeah, Juan?
Yeah, thanks, Dean. It wasn't
Oh.
it was not so much a question, but a comment that really tied into your earlier remark about the CEO that didn't leave.
Yeah.
So my first, and don't go back, don't look at my LinkedIn profile so you can figure it out. But
All right. No.
I think the guy is no longer amongst us. But my first CEO job was 27 years ago or so, and it party for the outgoing CEO and all that. And then he just kept coming in every day, and the board just liked him so much they felt bad for him because I think he basically just didn't want to go home to his wife. So what happened was he stayed on for like 6 months. It was really awkward. There was two CEO cars, corporate cars. It was just, he did vacate his office. But the way it was resolved, which will tie into what you're talking about now, the way it was resolved is that the regulators came out and they said, WTH, what's going on here? Two CEOs. It was a retirement party. There was actually a bonus given to the previous guy, and he's still on and is still drawing a salary, albeit part-time, 30 hours a week. So they just lowered our camel from a 1 to a 5.
Ooh.
And they said to the board, we had incredible numbers, 19% capital. They just said, yeah, we're going to take it off as soon as you guys can make your decision and have one CEO. I was like, wow. And he's like,
Wow.
don't worry, kid. Of course, I was younger then. He's like, don't worry, kid. I'm going to get you in there. And that's how that happened. But it was a little disconcerting to see your camel rating go down. I don't know if they do that today. It seems like it's probably somehow not proper, but really, to get to your point, I see it's not the board. We talk about the board needs their own succession plan. Certainly, there's a lot of aging directors, and not so many young people that want to join, just associations in general. But the bigger picture is the decision is the board's. And because of my awkward experience, I was like, what? Why did I give up my job? Why did I come here? And it was a bad start. So I would say the board has to be strong about that. And I think I'll go so far as to say that, when you don't have a succession plan, which is many smaller credit unions, what happens is it becomes a merger acquisition. And that's also the board. I mean, a CEO can have a lot of influence, but there's no denying typically, aside from when a CEO gets sick unexpectedly, there's no denying as someone's getting older
Right.
and nearing
Exactly.
retirement. So I'll let you take over, but I think it's a good segue into
Yes.
the board's
Ron, I
decision.
appreciate that. I love hearing these stories because to me, succession planning is what it is, but it's these stories and these kind of use cases that we can talk through that really makes it come to life because similar to the story I shared, the story you shared, if I just said that, I couldn't make it up, right? You'd be like, that's not true. People clearly move out of their office. I'm like, and similar because credit unions have branches. I've heard of CEOs and executives just starting to hang out in branches too, drinking the free coffee, right? That's also not acceptable. So thank you for bringing that up. Because being really clear about what your board is expected to do, having them be prepared to make those decisions too is huge. And that's a process that takes time. You don't figure that out overnight. But who owns the process? So putting the steps in place, identifying the people. Are you going to outsource some of that? Are you going to keep it in-house? Ron, you mentioned the merger issue, which we'll talk a little bit about more. That is huge here. It's one reason I'm so passionate about it because we don't have to merge as small credit unions. Worked with a credit union out west, smaller credit union. The board had such a terrible experience going through the process of hiring their last CEO, between not being able to find a candidate, working with an outside recruiting firm that was not helpful, that once they found this CEO, they said to her, we are never going through this process again. It was awful. It was a strain on our time because these are volunteers, right? And if you leave, we're going to consider merging because we don't want to go through this, right? And she reached out through her league, similar to here, and she was like, you've got to help me put a plan in place because I don't want this credit union to merge. My staff doesn't want to merge. But if something were to happen to me, that's what they're going to look for. And so we've got to keep that in mind. It's a bit of what I mentioned about succession planning is bigger than us. It's about keeping the credit union whole and keeping them successful and stable going forward. So there's a process. Somebody's got to own the process. A lot of times we see that process being owned by HR, or maybe somebody on the executive team. And then there's the question about who owns the decision. So at the end of the day, that's that, throat to choke of who makes the decision of who's going to hire the new CEO. I've seen confusion between executive team versus board, the board just kind of leaning on the executive team and not taking their role seriously. So talking about that up front helps that process go smoother. And additionally, one of the things I've helped boards with is to come in and help facilitate a conversation of what are we looking for in a new CEO, right? You know, Catie may have been the CEO for 35 years and it was great, but you probably don't want another Catie. You probably want some of those characteristics that worked really well. But if you have the opportunity to hire somebody new, you may want somebody who's really tied into the community. You may want somebody with a crazy financial industry background. You may want somebody who is really tied into the credit union movement. We see a lot of CEOs now who aren't coming from credit unions, and that is a decision to make because that's a different type of onboarding too, right? And so understanding that decision criteria, do you want somebody internal versus external? What are the pros? What are the cons of that? This is all, everything on this list are things that you can start doing today that will make succession plan easier when it comes time to execute that plan. There's nothing keeping you from having this conversation with your board this month, right? So this is one of those slides where I'm like, I'm not going to say it's easy to do, but it's doable. And there are people that can help with this, either within your credit union or working with the league, just having somebody else come in and kind of talk through. Sometimes just getting somebody else to facilitate that discussion helps, somebody that's not as tied into it. And we can help with that as well, or I can give y'all some, point y'all in the direction of some resources. So understanding this, documenting it, huge. And as we think about that new CEO, internal or external or whatever we decide to do, we also have to think about a new path to leadership. The path to leadership, the path to CEO doesn't necessarily look like what it used to, right? Amy, who's on the call, she and I had a conversation last week, and I had mentioned to her, I used to, one of my first jobs at CUNA Mutual 1,000 years ago was managing the internship program. And it was very beneficial to me, selfishly, because during the summer, we would have all of our executives come and do a lunch and learn with the interns. And the question was like, well, I mean, how do you become a CEO? What does that look like? What do you major in for that? I majored in CEO, not an option. So what does that look like? How did you get here? How did you make that decision? That was one of the first places I started hearing about the risk of being a leader, that it's not necessarily just the glory, the title, the people that report to you. There's a major risk to that too. And not everybody's willing to take it. And that's okay, but you have to know that for yourself. So as you document your decision criteria, I challenge y'all to think about a different path to leadership. Some people who are on staff, you may not think of as candidates for not even CEO at this point, let's just say leadership team. But these types of opportunities are a chance to just talk through it, right? Like, what do you want? What do you not want? It also helps, especially with small staffs at smaller credit unions, to show people a path to stay there longer. We spend so much time onboarding people, getting them trained, getting them figuring things out to only have them leave. And they may be leaving just because we didn't have a conversation with them, that we actually wanted them to be promoted in a couple of years, that we saw value in what they do. So one thing I encourage y'all to do, and some people do this with their HR lead, some people just do it with their executive team, but to identify what are the key roles in your credit union. It may be, the top 2 groups that report to the CEO. It may be, somebody who's been there forever, who can tell you where every nook and cranny is in the credit union. We all have that person. But what are those key roles, and how do you see that path going up to the CEO? What has changed over time? So I mentioned Catie may have been there for 40 years. A lot's changed in 40 years. So as you recruit somebody new, what are some of the things that you want them to have as part of their resume? One thing I have started seeing a lot more of is that community involvement. So they want a CEO that's not only leading the credit union, but also who is a figure in the community and shows the impact of credit unions and the credit union difference in the communities, willing to go, on the news channel, join the boards in town, chamber, that's what I was trying to think of, Chamber of Commerce, get out there and kind of be that advocate, which is not a position that everybody's comfortable with, right? And then understand the levers for replacement. And what I have to encourage y'all to do, both at the leadership team and then have that conversation with your board, is just having the conversation opens up so many doors and gets so much out on the table that it's going to help you to move forward. So have the conversation. Do we want to find somebody that helps us stay the course? We're doing well. We like our size. We like our community. We want to stay here. Or are you looking for somebody who's going to grow the credit union, either by members or maybe doing some mergers or some acquisitions or getting really into fintech? Is there something that you're really looking for in this next person, even though you don't know who that person is yet? But understanding that, which really is a strategic conversation, the kind of stay or grow or steady or, change conversation. I mentioned the grow and merge. I see a lot in potential versus experience. So sometimes it feels easier to hire somebody who has been a CEO before. That comes with a certain amount of expectations, especially for smaller credit unions, as we're really trying to get people into the movement to see how special we are. What potential are we seeing, right? We may have somebody who's pretty green, who's new to being an executive, new to being a CEO, but maybe that is the job of the old CEO emeritus, is to coach and train, or it's the board, or we've hired a coach to help them to grow and support them. It is unfair to hire somebody who is new in leadership, new in being an executive, and expect them to, prosper without giving them the proper support. So as an executive team or a board, you are committing to providing that support one way or another, right? If you hire somebody with a lot of experience, probably can be a little hands-off, give them some guidance. But that's a decision to make too. From some credit unions I've talked to, that's also a financial decision. You may be able to get somebody early in career. The cost of entry, for one way to say it, is a little lower than somebody in their expectations with a lot of experience. Additionally, I think it's a good conversation to have with your board and your leadership team. Are you looking for somebody who is super strategic and is out there thinking, next big thing, what are we going to do? I'm going to, here's our really robust 5-year plan. Or are you looking for somebody to really come in and just understand the operations of the business and make sure that everything is really solid, good, on firm footing, and to really be more involved in the day-to-day? I see CEOs doing either. CEOs do not do both well. They either do one or the other, and you hire leaders in different ways. So if you're hiring someone who's going to be more inspirational, aspirational, leading the business forward in more of a visionary role, then you're still going to need somebody in-house who is very good at operations and keeping the credit union sound and stable. On the other hand, if you hire a CEO who's really good at that part, then you may need some help with your strategy. You may need somebody to come in and help and do some of that poking and prodding to kind of get that strategy documented and a 3-year path forward. That's a place where your lead can help, we can help, who can come in and do that and kind of add that competency on top of the competency that you already have. Internal versus external. There's always a plus and minus to that. I just saw the time. Y'all, I told y'all I could talk about this all day. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know this can be a hot button topic, but the way I think about it, including women in leadership, is look at your membership. Look at who you serve as a credit union. Understand who they are, how they like to make their financial decisions, who they like to make their financial decisions with, and then see how that is reflected in your staff and in your board and in your executive team. And just be open to thinking about things differently. It's a good exercise to go through, regardless of if you're doing succession planning or recruiting or just better understanding your community so that you can serve them better. But to me, that's a good lens to use as you're thinking about all these other factors as well. So I have one more topic and then we'll just open it up for questions. And we've kind of touched on this, but I think this is kind of the nugget when it comes down to it about succession planning. And it's the part that can be hard to do because there's always a urgent thing every day, right? There's the everydayness of work. And if you always have your head down, getting things done, serving your members, dealing with whatever crisis is of the day, all of a sudden you're going to be caught flat-footed when you have to lift your head up and be like, oh my God, our CEO is leaving. I don't know what's going on, right? So you have to think of succession planning as more than just succession planning. It is a huge thing to take advantage of. Succession planning hits on talent development, talent management, retention, all these types of things that helps the credit union, regardless of who's the leader at this point. It's going to help the credit union be more stable, more successful, more firm in the community. This gets into the assumptions thing too. One example was working with a woman. She has this amazing human who kind of does more IT, but also has all these great ideas about how he can move the credit union forward. She sees him as her successor. He's early in career, still needs some coaching, but she really sees a lot of potential in him. And when I was asking her about it, she has not told him this, nor has she ever introduced him to the board. So if something were to happen to her and all of a sudden he has to go to the board meeting and he's never met these people don't know who he is. Well, we're setting him up, Ron, kind of like you said in your early days, you're not setting them up for success if you're not introducing them to the right people and kind of ushering them into the room, into the table where they have to sit. And if she tells him this, because he's smart, he's good, he's well connected, he may be looking at other jobs. I wouldn't blame him if he was. Why should he stay? Well, if he knows that he is a successor, he knows that the credit union is invested in him. And as a small credit union, you can't always send people to CUNA management school or whatever, but I learned everything I know pretty much by learning on the job. People invested in me by sitting next to me and showing me what they did and helping me understand how they interact with people. And that's something we all can do, regardless of our size, regardless of our budget. Some years are easier at training than others, but that side-by-side learning and working and investing, you can't replace that at the end of the day. And so when you think about succession planning, both short-term and having a bit of a runway, I want y'all to think about it as more than succession planning, as more of a talent development, talent retention tool for your credit union that's going to make sure that you have all the competencies and capabilities that you need to be able to be a successful credit union going forward. So just a quick recap slide here. If we were in person, I guess we could do this webinar too. I would always say, this is the slide to take a picture of, because we all take pictures of slides now, right? Have a whole photo album of them. But it's just kind of recapping what we talked about. So it is inevitable. Even though it may not be on our to-do list today, it's going to catch up with us at some point. We have to know who is responsible. The who's on first and what's on second of succession planning is probably half of making sure that it happens, because I know succession planning is important, but nobody told me it's my job to do, so I'm not going to do it because it's not my job to do it, and I got plenty of other stuff to do, right? So making sure somebody knows that they are responsible for it and what parts of it they're responsible for, even just using a good old RACI sometimes helps with that. And then understand that any change is an opportunity. We may miss the person that's been there forever. We may be glad when the door hits somebody on the way out, but it's an opportunity for change, right? And change gives us a chance to do some of the things that we have wanted to do, but maybe didn't have the chance to do before. So see it as an opportunity, but have those discussions to understand what parts of that opportunity you really want to take advantage of. Just as important, what don't you want to do there too? Like, we don't want this again. We don't want that again. We already have this covered. Figuring that is just, it's important. And then think of it as bigger than just the succession plan. It's talent management. It touches everybody in the organization. It gives everybody an opportunity to see themselves and see a career at the credit union. And so that really is something that gets managed on a monthly, on an annual basis, which also helps keep your succession plan up to date and alive, which is key to it too. It's easy to set it and forget it, and then all of a sudden, all those people you tap to successors no longer work at the company, right? So that just gives you a chance to keep it going. So I know we have about 8 minutes left, and y'all, I've already proven that I can talk nonstop. But I want to open it up for questions or stories. I love hearing the stories because we learn from those. So anything that y'all want to shout out or talk about, or things that we didn't cover today that you're like, Catie, where can I find more information on that?
Feel free to unmute yourself. If you don't want to unmute yourself, feel free to put questions in the chat and I'm happy to direct them over to Catie for you. So I do have a question just to start, Catie.
Yeah.
How far down the food chain should planning go? So, you talked about the board, you talked about the CEO, maybe the senior team. Should succession planning also go to like the mid-management level, or?
That's a great question, Dean. I think some of it depends on the size of your credit union. And I'm blanking on asset size right now, but for a smaller credit union, they had about 4 branches that I worked with out west. We took it down to the branch manager level. And one of the reasons we did that, and I didn't touch on it as much today, but we realized for that credit union, succession planning was just as much about knowledge management as it was about tapping the right person when the opportunity happens. And what I mean by that is it starts getting into documenting policies and procedures and how you do things and where that's stored. We learned with this credit union, some people had things in Teams, some people had things on a thumb drive that nobody knew where to find. Somebody could open one credit union branch and their policies were very inconsistent with this other credit union branch. And where that touches succession planning is if this branch manager needs to be out and this branch manager needs to come in and sub, if the policies and procedures are different, that subbing is not going to be smooth. It's not going to work. Also, the CEO saw the branch managers as leaders who then could potentially, be promoted into different roles. I think at a minimal, keeping it to the executive team, the CEO and the board.
I just want to add, I think Laurie will certainly be able to relate to this, and I'm not familiar with the other person that I saw earlier that was on, but I think they were PCT, Plymouth County Teachers Credit Union, also a smaller credit union. So I sometimes chuckle to myself, probably pretty soon it will be out loud, I hope not, when people say the word team and they talk about middle management and so forth. So I have myself and 3 employees, 50 million in assets. Laurie probably has 3 employees or so, I'm not sure.
I have
Right.
5. I'm 1 of 6. Yep.
Yeah, so when I say I have 4, I have 4.5 because I hired someone from a temp agency, but 4 official employees, 3 and myself. So when you talk about a middle management, it could be a person somewhere in the middle, literally. We don't have that kind of structure, and it makes it difficult. I don't know the particulars. What Laurie said, she had a plan, and then all of a sudden the person I imagine left, and I've gone through that numerous times in my 15 years here, and it can be difficult. And I think like sometimes, like in my credit union, you find yourself with 75%. So we're all good in math. So 4 employees, that would be 3 out of 4 in their 60s, and I won't tell you where I am on that. But so this can happen with real credit unions, especially smaller ones. I'm seeing them in my New England neck of the woods, and as a CCUA director, and it's so paramount, as you said, to have the associations, the leagues, people to help us with that because we're so busy with our day to day. Doing the home equity loans and the car loans and opening accounts when we can, and we don't really think about secession, and neither does our board because I'm just speaking about my board. It's a great board. They're very supportive of me, but also they are not as involved to a certain extent. They put a lot of faith in the CEOs and the managers, whatever their titles are, and they rely upon, well, what do you think? And that's where a lot of that falls. It's not always the 20 or 30 employee credit unions, 20 and 30 employee size credit unions we're talking about here. And I've also seen, at least once again, just locally, where I actually helped in 2014, I helped this Greater Boston credit union that had a great chance to be successful. It was a large university-based credit union, huge expansion opportunity. I helped the board select their CEO. I helped them with the process, did some strategic planning for them. And within a year or so, the new CEO that was chosen ended up just merging them out to a larger credit union. And that happens. It just happens. And I think a lot of it has to do with resources once again.
Mhm. Definitely. And Ron, I appreciate you saying that because the credit union that I worked with out west with the multiple branches, they probably, I think all in all had about 15 full-time employees. So to your point, there really was no middle management. So by the time we really sat down and my first questions to the CEO is like, well, let's identify what roles you want to make sure to have a succession plan for. It really did get down to the branch manager because the CEO could make loans if she needed to. She could come in and sit and, sub in. And so with a smaller operation, knowing what happens if something happens to somebody is huge. And yeah, I could talk about that a whole lot, but Lori, was there anything that you wanted to add?
You made me, like Ron said, we do this every day, right? We're the CEO, we might be opening accounts, doing loans or whatever. And we know that the succession plan is so important. And it keeps on getting put on the back burner a little bit because you're busy running your credit union.
Mm.
I thought that I had it all worked out in my mind and the person that was going to take over for me. I actually hired 3 30-somethings to grow them because that's where I thought it was going to be, and the one that I thought was going to take over for me has told me that she's going to retire when I retire.
That's not helpful, right? She can't
And
do
I'm
that,
like,
right?
wow.
Yeah.
And my 3 30-somethings aren't interested.
Yeah. We could spend a lot of time, and it's kind of why I said earlier, we did a 3-hour working session on this, and you can do it easily because you hit on so many topics. There's generational things too. Different generations, I've noticed, have different expectations on how they feel about work, how committed they are to work. I worked with a guy, mentored him in kind of a neighborhood situation. He got offered a promotion, pretty big promotion at his job. It wasn't a credit union, but he didn't want to take it because he didn't want a lot of extra responsibility. And it blew my mind. But the more I've kind of asked around, we're seeing that as well. And that makes a hard topic even harder, is to find people who are willing to take on that risk, that responsibility, that work to be able to do it. And the risk is higher when you're a small credit union because you don't have that many employees, right?
Right. So I've got 3 people who I thought I was going to be able to grow and to train, and I was going to be golden to have all these younger people here. And
Right.
they're all like, no, they like their job where they are, and that's where they want to stay. And so I feel like I'm stuck now, I mean, now I got to get somebody in the middle somewhere. I don't know how to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, I guess theoretically you can always just pull someone in on the 11th hour, 11th hour, meaning you got 3 months to go. You want to give them some kind of, mentorship, even if they're experienced. But it's still not as is still not as good, especially at a small credit union when I think back 15 years ago, I had worked at much larger credit unions and it was like a turnaround situation here. Um, and it was hard for me to get used to the smaller credit union mindset and also just the whole membership. It takes a while. You can't just move out the lorries of the world successfully and then put in someone that's a newbie from the outside and then have three 30-something-year-olds underneath them. I mean, it's a delicate balance. I can
Yeah.
really appreciate
And
the pain you're going through.
to your point, Ron, what you just said, and I know, believe me, when I do retire, I'm gone. I'm not gonna come back.
Right. No coffee in the lobby for Lori, right?
No, but I will say that I've been here for 28 years and this is my baby and I want the right person. Because I've seen what you said, Ron. I saw somebody take over about a year ago for another credit union that the CEO retired. They wanted to merge like within a year. I would die if that happened. No way. This is a great credit union and I want somebody that's gonna continue to propel it forward, so.
And sometimes when that does happen, at least I've seen a few cases where the person is a short-term CEO and they're like, look, we need to, I don't know what we can do. I don't know how I don't know how Laurie did it, kind of thing, right? But what happens is the financials go down too. Like the capital goes, the earnings go. And now what happens is, okay, when I started in 1982, there were 24,000 credit unions. And now there's like closer to 4,000, right? So it is inevitable for most credit unions and community banks for that matter. But if you had to merge, it's better to do mergers of equal. It's also better to merge when you're on a stronger footing. So you can have more bargaining leverage for your membership,
Right.
right? As maybe a board seat or two, depending. You don't do that when your financials are going like that. So the
Right.
timing is super critical, I think, for small credit unions.
I think the huge thing there, and I'm sure Dean and the association have webinars on this too, and we can help with that as well, is CEO changes, board stays the same. And so why is it that the credit union was fine with this CEO's leadership, new CEO comes in and the board is fine merging? And so I was in a similar situation when I served on a board. We ended up merging. And most of the people on the board did not know the merger situation with small credit unions. So it was out of left field for them that this was an issue, that it was an issue in the movement. They were caught flat-footed. We were caught flat-footed. And by the time the decision was made and we really had time to think about it, it was too late. And so I think there's a whole board education piece there as well, especially if they really trusted the CEO before, because it's like, I don't know, Ron, what do you think, right? And so because to me, they are the continuation. And so if we can get them trained and understanding strong board chair, that does help in those situations. It doesn't prevent it, but it helps. And I know we're at time. Dean, I'm going to just do one more slide.
Sure.
Just so we can stay connected, because as I mentioned, I love this. I have a passion around it. I have a passion around credit unions and small credit unions and the movement. I'd love to stay in touch. I can put my email in the chat, but we can connect on LinkedIn, and then FarWell's connections there too. I don't know how many people still use QR codes, but here we are with ours. So I'd love to stay connected and with the support of the association, really answer any questions that you have and provide any help that you need.
Yeah, this was really beneficial. I appreciate it.
I would love to. And
There will definitely be a part 2 to it.
great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I have, I took a lot of notes, and like I said, because there were some things that I did here and there that I haven't heard before.
Right.
Or that maybe because it was 10 years ago, or it was, 8 years ago and I did, I definitely came out with with a lot of things in here that I think are very helpful.
Oh, that makes me happy. And the board piece too for Dean and Amy and for the group here, I think that one is kind of interesting right now because the NCUA is focusing more on the board succession because I think in their mind they are that continuing between CEO changes and they help hire the CEO. So for NCUA, they're like, well, if you have a good board succession plan, that should keep everything else stable. We can debate that, but we still have to have it, right?
Right.
And so talking through how that works, recruiting board members, like Ron mentioned, that's a generational thing too. We're not seeing as many people wanting to spend time, outside of work and home to do more work, right? So how do you find people who are dedicated? So yes, part 2, whenever you guys are ready.
You hit the nail on the head when we're all chasing, as a credit union, we're chasing the natural member that's young, that can borrow their 20s, 30s, even 40s. They're becoming elusive, but also is the same thing as the directors at that age.
Right.
Mike, then as much as I have a fondness for, and I can relate to old people, we need the young ones on the board because the products we're talking about, like fintech and stuff like that. I mean, I give credit to my board because they're really progressive, but I would say not all directors, especially older ones, are along those lines. And it's a
Definitely.
circle. It's a circle of the credit union life. So
Right.
And I
thank you.
think a lot, oh, sorry, Dean, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with Ron, because I
yeah.
hear that a lot from, especially the smaller credit unions. They're struggling to keep people on the board and get them on board with, getting that new technology. So
Yeah, especially if there's not term limits on the board. A lot of people have served for a long time. These are their friends. It becomes kind of a, I get to see my friends once a month type of thing. And it can, it doesn't always, but it can kind of lose its how to say it. It loses its, oh, I've got to work for this. I got to prepare for it. I've got to, because you just get so used to it, right? Like,
Right.
well, I know what to expect.
they lose their purpose.
Yeah, yes, thank you for summing that up. So, yeah, lots to discuss there, and it's a great discussion in person with board members, and then having their CEO in the room to hear it as well. You get a bunch of ahas. So,
I think if there weren't board limits, there wouldn't be as many credit unions, honestly, because I know some credit unions are like begging former board of directors, please come on, we don't have enough for a quorum. I know another one, it's Greater Boston and small credit union under 50 million, and the chairman is 92 or 3, and I mean, it doesn't mean you can't be active, but he's been on there a long, long time, and they don't always know the resources, the current resources that are open, like through the CCUA.
Right.
well, and also just the knowledge in his head when
Oh,
he
yeah,
leaves, how do
institutional.
you get that out so that somebody else can learn from it?
Well, that's
Right.
where that you use that title emeritus CEO, whatever. That's where you see that on a board sometimes because yeah, that institutional knowledge is just incredible.
Priceless. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you
I
very
really
much.
appreciate
Thank you very
it.
much.
I
Yeah.
really did find it very, I loved it. I really did.
I'm so glad to hear
I'm
that.
glad I joined.
Wonderful.
too.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Good to see
Bye.
you.